Sandy Rios in the morning on American Family Radio.
I think this is just one more example of this enormous power that these platforms have. And I'm glad in some of the other issues you guys were just talking about that Secretary Yellen has called for an investigation to look at this manipulation. You want to have small investors, you want to have people participating, but you don't want to have deliberate manipulation. And that's always a thin line. So I'm glad that this is being looked into because you don't want behavior. Overall, with tech, I think we know for a long time they've pushed against any kind of rules of the road saying, hey, trust us. And that just hasn't worked for people. It sure hasn't worked for people that have had their private information spit out all over the place. It hasn't worked for people who are victims of misinformation. And so that's why, in addition to antitrust, we have to get some rules of the road for privacy in place. And we've got to make sure that the economy is fair for people. And I look at this from a business perspective, which is a lot of your show. I don't think it's good for startups. I don't think it's good for competition if you have big companies with 90% market share over search engines in the case of Google that can control the gateways to things. And so that's why my bill and the work that we're doing, and the House has done a lot on this too, House of Representatives, is aimed at actually getting to what I consider a conservative principle, capitalism. This idea of competition in the marketplace. Adam Smith himself warned about the overgrown army of monopolies and that we always had to have a check and balance. And we are rusty and we haven't kept up with the marketplace.
Well, this has to be a very different day. That's, I think, the first time I've ever played an Amy Klobuchar clip when I actually wanted to play it for you because I think she has some very good points. We want to talk today about, I don't think I need to spend 30 seconds to explain to you why big tech, why Amazon, why all these huge companies have gained power over our lives, censoring books and thoughts, the things that you can buy and sell. It's becoming at crisis level. I guess the big issue is, why is no one doing anything? When Congress holds hearings, they sound like with very few exceptions, like old doddering fools who have no idea what they're talking about. Why isn't Congress doing something? Well, there are lots of people that are trying to do something, and the interesting thing is, among conservatives, there's a huge divide about what to do, and that's one of the reasons that Congress is paralyzed. Well, I've asked someone to join us this morning who's all about this issue. He's someone that I trust. He's got great judgment. Mike Davis is the founder and president of the Article 3 Project. He was he was working for Senator Grassley when Brett Kavanaugh was being, ushered through that horrendous process of being nominated as a Supreme Court justice, and it was Mike who was shepherding all of that. He has such a tremendous experience. He's also, I could say a lot of things about him, but he's also gone on to start another thing, which is called the Internet Accountability Project. And in that, he has gathered around a ton of experts, people that I really trust. Mike represents the leadership of a great divide. A lot of people that I work with are on a very different page, and we're going to explain that, and it will help you to understand why we're kind of at loggerheads and why nothing is being done. Mike, thanks for joining me this morning. I so appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Sandy.
All right, so your bailiwick has been judicial nominations, Mike, and you deserve, you'll go down in history for what you did for Brett Kavanaugh, honestly. In fact, let me ask you a personal question about that. How did that whole business, that whole drama that we all watched, affect you personally?
It didn't really affect me that much personally. I expected the Democrats to play that dirty because I've seen it my whole life, and I was raised by Democrats. Fortunately, they've grown up and become Republicans, but I've just seen my whole life how Democrats will do everything and everything they can to obtain power because that's all they care about is power.
Okay, so I get that. So you had exposure to it. You are like a lot of our mutual friends who have a leftist past, and that makes them even more powerful to fight back because they understand it. Well, okay, but so the second part of that question, briefly, then, is how about professionally, though? How did that tweak you in some way, or send you in a certain direction, or just to confirm what you already knew?
I mean, I've always been conservative. I've always been unfazed. I've always been determined, and So I was really all three of those things during the process, and nothing changed.
Yeah. All right. So, so then the next transition question, because I do want to know, your judicial nominations is your bailiwick, and you are so good at it. And you're so seasoned. So why the leap to the big tech wars?
You know, it was something that someone came to me and asked me to do this a couple of years ago, to start this Internet Accountability Project, IAP, theIAP.org. And the more I dug into big tech, the more I understood that they had way too much power, and they were using that power for bad things. You know, I was one of those conservatives before who thought, okay, well, we have a free market. I'm a free market conservative. And if these big tech platforms are big, that's a good thing. That shows success. We want companies to get big and thrive and be successful. And I just didn't think about the broader implications of what was going on here. And the problem here is they are monopolists. We've had antitrust laws on the books, the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act, other antitrust laws on the books for a century in America for a reason. And antitrust laws are American ideas. And that is that when you become too big, when you have too much market power, and when you use that power to harm the competitive market, to harm competition, and to harm consumers, we need to step up. And it's not regulation. It is the opposite of regulation. It is targeted law enforcement. It is law enforcement to target these monopolists, to make sure that they're not abusing their market power, which hurts all of us. Right? It's the opposite of regulation. These big tech monopolists. There are four $1 trillion big tech monopolists. They're each worth $1 trillion. Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. And they have way too much power, and they're using that power to harm consumers. They're crushing small businesses. They're canceling conservatives. They're deplatforming sitting presidents of the United States. I mean, it's they've gotten way too big.
Mike, let's go back. I know you've touched on this, and we don't have time to do a long history lesson. But just because we have so many people listening who don't have they're not learning American history, and part of it is what you alluded to. Standard Oil, the big major companies that grew at the turn of the century in the United States and did wonderful things, also became so big that they were controlling the market and they were controlling prices, and that's why the antitrust legislation was founded. And I think currently, and this would be not very current, but Ma Bell, we used to call it Ma Bell, our telephone services at the time were just telephone, was broken up. And so people that were the big corporations and these big tycoons of industry were Republicans. And it was stinging. It was very painful to be broken up by government. And so would you not say, Mike, that because of that and because of the marriage of big business and success with the Republican Party, that there's a knee-jerk repulsion at the notion that government would come in and break up your baby, what you grew, what you built on your own? There is a knee-jerk revulsion to that. Just speak to that, if you would.
Sure. I mean, it was before corporations were, their mission was to make profits for their shareholders, and that's what they did. We don't have the same type of corporations today. We have these woke corporations that they want to social engineer from the left. A lot of these corporations are taken over by leftists, and they want to use their corporate power and do things that government power that the government can't do. So we just saw this with the White House. The White House press secretary came out, Jen Psaki came out and said that she wants all of the social media platforms to censor people who are commenting about COVID. Well, they're putting. She calls it misinformation. So if you put misinformation, according to the White House, which means it's going against Tony Fauci and the Biden regime, then Jen Psaki says that Facebook should deplatform you if you're spreading this so-called misinformation on Facebook, and then every other social media platform should do the same, right? So these corporations of today are not just the profit-driven corporations that we saw from the past. They are promoting a political agenda, and That's the problem. These corporations have become way too powerful, and they're using that power to go after conservatives.
Yeah, and I think everybody agrees. Well, everybody on, I guess I should say, our side. That sounds so simple. Most Americans probably agree with that. Even on the left, I think they can see what's happening, and if they're thinking people, they can see that that's not going to go well for them either in time. But the issue is the cure, because we'll talk about Republicans for a second, which I all the time do, not in nice ways, but they're paralyzed. Because from my perspective, I've said this to you in an email, and I believe, with my rudimentary understanding of this, that the whole notion moving to something slightly different, a free trade, was so ingrained in conservatives. I remember well having arguments in the 90s on the radio with people that with free trade was like what can I say? It's a statement of faith, the holy grail. And you didn't do anything to interfere with free trade. And that's why we opened up to China, and we wanted to open up our borders. And they kept telling us this was wonderful. And I had a check in I just knew that was not going to end well. Not that I was particularly brilliant, but I do have common sense. It didn't end well. It's a disaster with China. But I think that whole notion that free trade superseded every other kind of approach poisoned the well and killed any kind of logical response to what China was doing. And I'm wondering, Mike, if the same thing's happening with this aversion to breaking up big companies by the natural bent of conservatives to let people entrepreneur, to build, to have the freedom to innovate. Is that standing in the way? Are they not seeing clearly because of that past?
That could be part of it. I think another part of it is that big tech, particularly Google, has bought off the swamp. They've bought off the politicians on both sides of the aisle. They've bought off the interest groups on both sides of the aisle. The so-called conservative DC think tanks are bought off by big tech. And so there's really, before I started the Internet Accountability Project 2 years ago, there was not any group on the right that was dedicated to taking on big tech. IAP is the first, and frankly, I don't want to be a monopoly in this space because we're taking on trillion-dollar monopolists. I want other groups. I want other conservatives. I want other people to join me in this fight because it's a lonely fight, but we're doing well. I mean, we just saw Congressman Ken Buck from Colorado, a Republican from Colorado, is the top Republican on the House Antitrust Subcommittee, and he has been phenomenal on this issue. He is the tip of the spear who has been leading the charge, taking on big tech from the right with antitrust. He co-sponsored 6 bills in the House, working with Republicans and Democrats, because that's what you need to do to get 60 votes in the Senate to get anything done. So he's working, and he just passed back in June. He passed 6. He went 6 for 6, passed 6 bills out of the House Judiciary Committee over the opposition of Jim Jordan and the Republican leadership, and got these bills passed. And I think it's very important for your listeners to learn about these bills and get on board with these 6 antitrust bills. And you can go to Congressman Ken Buck's website to find out more about these bills. But it's really important. These bills are not perfect. They're not a panacea. No legislation is. Legislation's like making sausage, right? It's not pretty. But I would encourage every House Republican and every Senate Republican to talk to Congressman Ken Buck's office and get on board with some or all of these bills. Now, again, they're not perfect. Offer amendments. But this notion that you're going to come in and say these bills are just big government or Democrat bills, that's gaslighting. That's carrying the water for big tech. That's carrying the water for Google. And that's the problem. This is a good way to smoke out the Republicans who actually care about these woke companies getting too big and canceling conservatives, including even the President of the United States, President Trump. Republicans need to stop talking and start doing.
Yes, I totally agree. And let me just concur, Mike, because of my working in D.C. for so long, that firsthand knowledge and experience with organizations that you would never see and people who are on the take with Google, even in the White House under President Trump. I knew people in the White House who were in strategic positions, who were working so closely with Google. It was amazing. It was amazing there. And the think tanks that you think you can trust, almost all of them taking money from big tech, and politicians who you would never expect working with big tech, working with Google. It is very distressing, and it's very true. And let me just say that there is a new website that's been, and I know you know all about this, Mike, but it's called Big Tech Funding. Big Tech Funding. I think, is it American Principles Project who's done this, put this together?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So what they're doing
and they're
is
great.
yeah. So you tell people what this. If they look at this, what will they see?
You go look at this site, and what you're going to see, it shows who's taking Google funding. So it actually puts in web extensions. So on your web browser. So when you search for a company, it will show you, or when you search for a politician or one of these nonprofit organizations, these advocacy organizations, it will show you who takes Google funding or who's taken big tech funding in the past.
And then you can draw a line to those of the people that don't want to use antitrust. That's what really is very hard to say, but true. Mike, the obvious question, though, to push the other side is, why is Amy Klobuchar, who is not our friend on anything, why is she so high on using antitrust laws to break up big tech?
Well, I would say this. Sometimes politics make strange bedfellows, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So I think that big tech is one of the biggest threats to conservatism right now, because they are trying to wipe us off the map. They're trying to say that our ideas are misinformation and that we need to be censored. It's not only do they want to disagree with us, which is fine, they don't even want to debate us. They just want to cancel us. They want to get rid of us. They want to chase us out of the online public square. And that is a huge threat to us as conservatives. It's the biggest threat we face, right? So we need to fight back. And the way we fight back is through antitrust law enforcement. It is targeted law enforcement. It's not regulation. It's actually the opposite of regulation. Facebook has come out and said that they want regulation. Of course they want regulation, because they're a trillion-dollar company and they can afford regulation, and regulation creates entry barriers to make it harder for startup competitors. I mean, think about this with Parler. People have said, the conservatives have said, the Google shills have said, if you don't like Twitter, if you don't like Facebook, build your own. Okay, so what happened? We had Parler come along, and it was a startup competitor to Twitter, and we saw that there were a lot of conservatives who were bleeding out from Twitter to Parler, and Twitter did not like this. And so what did they do? You had the App Store duopoly of Apple and Google that control like 90+% of the app stores, kicking Parler out of the app stores. And then you had Amazon through Amazon Web Service, another trillion-dollar monopoly, kicking Parler off the internet. And what did they say the excuse was? They said that January 6th was organized on Parler, and so therefore we needed to shut it down because it was dangerous. Well, the actual fact was that people organized the protest of January 6th on Facebook more so than Parler, and this was just an excuse to get rid of a competitor. And so Parler sues, and what happened? You had Parler suing for antitrust violations, and they were going to lose. They had to amend their complaint, and the reason is that we have this thing in antitrust law called the Consumer Welfare Standard, where essentially conservatives decades ago essentially used judicial activism to rewrite our century-old antitrust laws to make it harder to bring these antitrust suits, because these conservative judicial activists were trying to protect their corporate buddies. Well, now guess what? Because of this so-called consumer welfare standard, where they only look at price, the effects of price, and these Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google, these so-called free services don't have a price, and so it's very hard to win these antitrust lawsuits against big tech because of this consumer welfare standard. So, as conservatives, we need to reevaluate this. Right? Why do we want to promote this consumer welfare standard for when we have this big tech economy where we're going to lose these antitrust lawsuits against big tech? I mean, there are just a lot of things that we need to reevaluate as conservatives. These quaint notions about, free markets and competition and, big isn't bad, that all sounds good until we're chased out of the public square and thrown in the gulags.
Yep, exactly. And I still think, you got this is like pushing a boulder up a hill. I know that, Mike, but you make a very compelling case. And I have to say that I am persuaded to agree with you. And I know that's very controversial, but I am. I think this is a unique time. We have never been in this situation before. And it requires unique thinking. It requires us to shake loose of old notions that are not based on what's happening now. And so where is one particular place where people could get information, Mike, about this?
Well, the one particular place is go to Congressman Pinbuck's website to learn about these 6 pieces of antitrust legislation. And then you can also come to our website, thepiap.org, diap.org. Sign up for our newsletter. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter.
Okay.
We're
all right.
We're a pretty edgy, controversial group.
Yes, you
and
are.
We're out there fighting.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. And that's why I wanted to talk to you, Mike. So I appreciate your time, and I think you did a great explanation for us. So we will put those on our Facebook page. We'll put those links, and maybe somebody might see them if we're lucky. Mike, thank you so much. God bless you for all that you're doing. Sandy Rios in the morning on AFR Talk.